The stage lights were blinding, pouring down on the small figure that had just walked nervously into the center of the auditorium. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. His hair was messy, his shorts were worn and too big for him, and his thin shirt had been washed so many times it had lost all color. His feet were bare, dusty from the streets he had walked to reach this moment. He clutched the microphone in both hands, as if it were his only lifeline. The silence in the hall was heavy, filled with quiet murmurs and skeptical glances. The boy's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He had never been on a stage this big before. Back home in the crowded streets of Manila, he usually sang at street corners, hoping strangers might drop a coin or two into his small tin can. Sometimes he sang outside restaurants where wealthy tourists dined, his voice competing with car horns and the constant buzz of city life. He never imagined he would be here, standing before world-famous judges and an audience of thousands, all waiting for him to prove he was worthy of their attention. One of the judges leaned forward with concern, whispering into her microphone, "He looks so young. I wonder if he's ready." Another judge tilted his head, his expression caught between doubt and curiosity. The audience shared the same uncertainty. Some folded their arms, others leaned back in their chairs, skeptical that this barefoot boy could impress anyone. To them, he was just another hopeful kid with a dream too big for his small shoulders. Then, in a shy, trembling voice, the boy introduced himself. His accent was thick, his English broken, but his sincerity was clear. "My name is Angelo. I am from Philippines. I sing on the street, to help my mama and my little sister. This is my dream." His words were not rehearsed. They came straight from his heart, raw and unpolished. The hall grew quieter, the murmurs fading. Something about his honesty touched the people listening. The lights shifted, and the familiar strumming of a guitar began to play through the speakers, the opening notes of Hotel California. A ripple moved through the audience. It was an ambitious song, beloved by millions, one of those classics that demanded skill and soul. Many in the audience doubted he could pull it off. Some even shook their heads, whispering that the choice might be too big for him. Angelo took a deep breath, his eyes squeezing shut. For a brief moment, he remembered his mother's face, tired, but smiling when he sang to her at night. He thought of his little sister, her stomach growling as she asked if he could sing just one more song before bedtime, because music made her forget the hunger. He thought of all the times people ignored him on the street, walking past as if he didn't exist. This was his one chance to be seen, to be heard. When he opened his mouth, the first note trembled but then grew strong. The sound of his voice seemed to cut through the air like light through darkness. It was not the polished voice of a trained singer, but it carried something far deeper: pain, longing, and the resilience of a soul that had already lived through more than most adults ever would. The audience grew still, conversations stopped, even the judges froze, their skepticism fading into astonishment. From the very first line, Angelo was no longer a poor boy in ragged clothes. He was a storyteller. He poured his heart into every lyric, shaping the song not just with melody but with emotion. The stage no longer frightened him, instead, it became his home. And as the golden spotlight shone down on him, the world began to see not just a child, but a star in the making. The first verse flowed from Angelo's lips like a prayer, trembling at first but quickly settling into something steady, something commanding. The haunting lyrics of Hotel California filled the massive hall, yet it was not the song itself that captivated everyone, it was his voice. It was rough in places, cracked with youth and hardship, but the emotion he carried gave it a depth that no professional training could replicate. Every note sounded as though it came directly from his soul, scarred and beautiful. The audience, who had moments earlier doubted him, began leaning forward. Their eyes widened as they realized this wasn't just a child singing an old rock classic. This was a story being told, painted in colors of suffering, hope, and survival. Some clutched their chests as though they could physically feel the weight of his voice pressing against their hearts. Others closed their eyes, letting his voice wash over them like a tide. One of the judges, a man who had built his career on finding stars, shook his head slowly. He had heard thousands of singers, but rarely did he hear a voice that carried so much raw truth. His eyes softened, his arms unfolding, his skepticism melting away with every lyric. Another judge discreetly wiped her eyes, unable to stop the tears. She whispered, "He's not just singing, he's living it." Angelo didn't notice their tears. He was lost inside the song, his eyes closed tightly as though afraid that if he opened them, the moment would slip away. He sang not to impress, but to release everything he had carried in his young heart. Every hunger pang, every lonely night, every prayer whispered under the Manila stars. His small body shook with the intensity of each note, but his voice never faltered. By the time he reached the chorus, the hall had transformed. The once skeptical audience was now on its feet, clapping in rhythm, shouting words of encouragement. The camera panned across faces streaked with tears, grown men crying, mothers hugging their children tightly, strangers holding hands as though bound together by the magic of his voice. The boy who entered the stage invisible was now unforgettable. Backstage, the crew members had stopped what they were doing. Stagehands, producers, even security guards stood frozen, their eyes locked on the monitor. It wasn't just a performance anymore, it was history in the making. "That's not a boy," one whispered, shaking his head. "That's an angel." Angelo's voice grew stronger, soaring higher with every line. He sang with a force that seemed too large for his tiny frame. The microphone quivered in his hands, but he held on, pouring every ounce of strength into the song. He didn't hear the audience erupting in cheers or the judges rising from their seats. All he heard was his own heart beating in rhythm with the guitar. As he approached the final verse, something shifted. His voice cracked, but instead of weakening, it grew more powerful. That crack wasn't a mistake, it was honesty. It was the sound of a boy who had endured too much but still refused to give up. The entire auditorium leaned in, hanging on every syllable, as though the truth of life itself was hidden inside his voice. When he sang the last note, the sound lingered, echoing across the hall like a spirit refusing to leave. Angelo opened his eyes slowly, breathless, his chest rising and falling. For a second, there was only silence. He thought he had failed. He thought maybe the audience hadn't understood him. His gaze dropped to the floor, tears threatening to spill. Then it happened. The hall erupted. The sound of applause thundered like a storm, the audience screaming his name, clapping, stomping, cheering. People were crying openly, wiping their faces, hugging strangers beside them. The judges were standing, some with their hands over their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Angelo's tiny shoulders trembled as he realized, they had felt it. They had understood. What had started as doubt had turned into a standing ovation so powerful it shook the boy to his core. In that moment, the barefoot street singer from Manila was no longer invisible. He was unforgettable. For a few heartbeats, Angelo stood frozen on stage, the deafening roar of applause almost unreal to him. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his hands gripping the microphone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He looked around, bewildered, as if the cheers belonged to someone else. The golden lights above him reflected in his teary eyes, making them shine like stars. One of the judges leaned forward, her voice trembling as she spoke into the mic. "Angelo, you have no idea what you just did. You didn't just sing a song, you gave us your heart." Her words broke, and she pressed a hand to her chest, overcome with emotion. Another judge, a stern man known for his tough critiques, stood up slowly, his eyes glistening with tears. He pointed at Angelo, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was the performance of a lifetime. You are what this stage is meant for." Angelo's lips parted, as if to say thank you, but nothing came out. His throat was tight, his voice caught in a knot of tears. He simply bowed his head, overwhelmed. Then, suddenly, without hesitation, slam! One of the judges hit the golden buzzer. The sound reverberated through the hall like thunder, and in an instant, golden confetti burst from above, cascading down in a glittering rain. The audience screamed louder, their cheers mixing with the music of the buzzer, creating a symphony of triumph. Angelo looked up, eyes wide in shock, his hands trembling as golden paper swirled around him. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. He pressed his small hands against his face as tears spilled freely, his knees buckling beneath him. He fell to the ground, sobbing, overcome by the weight of what was happening. This was the moment every contestant dreamed of, the symbol of destiny changing in an instant, and it was his. The judges rushed to the stage. The woman who had first spoken knelt down beside him, wrapping her arms gently around his shaking shoulders. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You've made it. You've touched millions tonight." Her voice cracked, and even she couldn't stop her tears. The other judges stood nearby, clapping, nodding, their faces glowing with admiration and awe. The audience chanted his name, Angelo. 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 Their voices unified like a choir. Camera flashes lit up the hall, capturing the moment that would soon spread across the world. In the balcony, someone shouted, "We love you, Angelo." And the boy, through his tears, managed a trembling smile. Backstage, his mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. She had always believed in him, but she had never imagined her son, the boy who sang on the streets for a handful of coins, would stand in a storm of golden confetti, celebrated as a star. His little sister jumped up and down, clapping, shouting his name louder than anyone, her voice piercing through the noise, reaching his ears. Angelo finally stood, wiping his eyes, his small frame glowing under the golden rain. He looked at the judges, then at the audience, then upward, whispering softly, "Thank you, Lord." His words were swallowed by the noise, but his lips were clear, and his gratitude touched every soul watching. The camera zoomed in on his tear-streaked face, the golden confetti tangled in his hair, his eyes filled with light. This image would replay around the world, millions of times, inspiring countless hearts. The poor boy from Manila had not only won the hearts of a crowd, he had won a place in history. As the music swelled and the audience clapped in rhythm, Angelo stood taller, still trembling, but now with pride. He was no longer just the barefoot boy who sang on the streets. He was a symbol of hope, proof that dreams born in the hardest places could shine the brightest. And under that rain of gold, Angelo smiled through his tears, finally believing in something he had once thought impossible. He belonged on this stage.